Ha, I forgot to change the scene. Hello, everyone. It's Happy Holidays from the Cameron Journal. I'm getting clever with these graphics. But hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. This is the last one of 2025, everyone. We made it. Oh my goodness. What a year it has been. I have a handful of stories heading into the holiday, including the one about total boomer luxury communism that I didn't get to last week in the hubbub of everything. Um, it's been a long year. We obviously inaugurated a new president in January. President Trump will be in office a year next month, so they're on 11 months and 3 weeks. But January 20th will be the end of the first full year of Trump in Trump in office, and so much has happened. The Epstein files were released on Friday, which is crazy. I talked about that in the newsletter. I might touch on that a little bit as well, mostly because so little, so little happened. Like, we found so little from what we have so far. So, but we might dash into that a little bit. But yeah, so it's just been a crazy year. It has been a lot of news stories. A lot of things have happened. Just a lot of a lot of everything has happened in the last year, and there's just so little, to just, I don't know. I mean, maybe take away from this year, because it's been so busy and so much has happened, but we don't necessarily feel like things have moved forward, um, or that things have changed that much, or whatever have you. Obviously, over the last year, we've gone through the tariffs, um, we've gone through all sorts of crazy, things, changes in trade. Prices have come down on some things in some places, but not in others. There's been, so many moments over the past year, and so many, really great and fun things. I might work on pulling together a little bit of a year in review. I want to remind everyone that we will be doing a New Year's Eve stream, not for the Cameron Journal, but for the Living Joke. On New Year's Eve, I'm going to turn the stream on at 4, which is our usual broadcast time on Wednesdays. We're going to turn the recording on at 4. We're going to hang out. We're going to play games. There's been talk of a magic round. There's been a talk of playing some video games on, like, Will and Connor's stream while we're still hanging out here. So, come ring in the new year with us on the 31st, obviously, at 4 p.m. If you're watching this now on whatever channel, whether you're watching on a Cameron Journal property or if you're with us from Suit Media, you have the channel. You know where to go. We'll be broadcasting on all things. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be a long stream, like 8 hours, kind of like from 4 p.m. all the way to midnight East Coast. So just come hang out with us. We're gonna have a lot of fun. I might try to do a little year in review sort of thing. And kind of talk about some of the big stories of the year. But yeah, it's just 2020 has been a long year, personally, professionally, economically, politically. A lot has happened, so it's important to just kind of take stock for a moment and think about the year that has passed. Um, Very similarly to oh, I lost my camera for some reason. Very similarly, what did Lumina isn't the software behind my video camera is sometimes very annoying because it will die randomly for no good reason. There we go. And then decide that it's just not going to cooperate. Anyway, so there's a lot going on in the headlines. So let's dive into those. It's the last show, and I'm just kind of here hanging out, and we're doing this. And oh, I was gonna remind everybody there will be no newsletter until the new year. So your Saturday newsletter, you would be due one this Saturday after Christmas. No one's reading. Like no one's. I'm not gonna be reading. I'm going to be hanging out and drinking. Like no one's reading. Similarly, we're also there's so the next newsletter will be in January, and we'll do kind of a big maybe end of year catch up sort of thing. But yeah, so basically we're black after tonight. The lights go dark, and we are blackout here at the Cameron Journal until the new year. We will see you in 2026. But before we go, let's dive into a couple headlines. So let me do this and this and let's get rid of that, but let's paste in this. There we go. And let's start with the Epstein files, let's change this graphic real quick, and we'll start with the Epstein files. Here we go. So I've been following the release of the Epstein files, and I've been loving the reporting from New York Times. As a video, we can actually see what or not. So the Justice Department released the first batch of the long-awaited Jeffrey Epstein files on Friday. Yes, we know. Thank you. More than 13,000 documents. And as I said in the newsletter, that's clearly a narrative play. Yeah, Jeffrey Epstein knew everybody, which is kind of crazy. Someone said on Twitter he should have written a book about networking. So it's because he should have written a book on it, because he knew everybody. And yeah, it is kind of note that there was very little mention of President Trump, and there were a lot of redactions. They do have to justify every one of those redactions, and that will be interesting. The victims doesn't feel with their redactions. Yeah.
The files and stop redacting names that don't need to be redacted. It's just, who are we trying to protect? Are we protecting the survivors, or are we protecting these elite men that need to be put out there?
That is probably the most interesting detail of this whole thing, is the Justice Department was required by law to deliver the full release of the Epstein files Friday last. And they failed. They said that there would be more document production, and that the document production would finish at the end of the year. So every day that they have not released all the files they have, they're technically in violation of the law. Every single day, including Saturday and Sunday and today. I have not seen new files come out today, so I don't know where the rest of them are. But it is interesting. The work ahead. Let's talk about the work ahead with this. So now we've got a ton more information. What's the work ahead? The work ahead is to take the information from the House Oversight Committee, the information from the Blue Black Book that one reporter has, the emails Bloomberg has, and this information, and start to piece together a full timeline. There's a book in there for somebody, not me, but there's a book in there for somebody. That's several years' work. There's a book in there for somebody. That's the next work coming forward, is to kind of put all the information together and maybe start to figure out who some of these people are. But let's read the latest that was updated yesterday. It says here, the Justice Department came under intense scrutiny over the weekend for its initial release of files related to the investigations into Jeffrey Epstein, the financier and convicted sex offender, even as it prepared to make public more material from the inquiries. Some victims and advocates criticized the batch posted by the Justice Department on Friday as heavily redacted and containing few revelations. Some lawmakers asserted that the department's failure to meet a 30-day deadline to release all the files, as imposed by Congress last month, meant the Trump administration had failed to adhere to the law. True. After the initial release, the department removed from the online collection a small number of photographs from inside Mr. Epstein's home. Among them were one showing a credenza with a number of pictures, including at least one of Mr. Trump, raising questions about whether the administration was seeking to shield the president. That image was later reposted by the department. The release of the files had been long awaited by those who believed the materials could shed light on Mr. Epstein's activities and his ties to prominent and powerful men. Mr. Epstein died in jail in 2019 while under indictment on federal charges of sex trafficking minors. The Justice Department said more documents would be released in the coming weeks as it sought to comply with a bipartisan law that required the entire investigative record, with few exceptions, to have been made public by the end of last week. Here are key takeaways about the initial release. One, the Justice Department said it would not remove mentions of Trump. Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, said on Sunday that the Justice Department was trying to comply with the statute requiring the release of the files, but that it was a gargantuan task that had to be done carefully to protect victims. You're talking about a million or so pages of documents, virtually all of them contain victim information, Mr. Blanche said on NBC's Meet the Press. He said the administration would not remove any mentions of Mr. Trump from the files, as they continue to be released in the coming weeks. Quote, "We are not redacting information around President Trump," Mr. Blanche said. Later on Sunday, the Justice Department republished the deleted image of the credenza in Mr. Epstein's home that held the picture of Mr. Trump. After the review, it was determined there's no evidence that any Epstein victims are depicted in the photograph, and it has been reposted without any alteration or redaction, the Justice Department said in a statement on social media. Some lawmakers expressed frustration. Representative Tom Massey, the Kentucky Republican who helped write the Epstein files legislation, said administration officials were, quote, flouting the spirit and letter of the law in an appearance on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday. He cited the many redactions and administration's failure to release all the files on Friday. Speaking about Mr. Epstein's victims, Mr. Massey said he believed, quote, the most expeditious way to get justice for these victims is to bring inherent contempt against Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. Mr. Massey, one of the authors of the law compelling Justice Department to release all of its material on Mr. Epstein, said he and the co-sponsor of his law, Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, were in the process of drafting that resolution. Either congressional chamber can vote to hold a person or official in contempt by a simple majority vote. Mr. Massey said he and Mr. Khanna were drafting a resolution that would impose a fine on Bondi, quote, for every day that she's not releasing these documents, unquote. The released files, which included thousands of photographs and investigative documents, added little to the public's understanding of Mr. Epstein's conduct. The materials also did not provide much additional insight into Mr. Epstein's connections to wealthy and powerful businessmen and politicians who associated with him. The materials were mostly drawn from investigations into Mr. Epstein, reaching back into an initial inquiry opened by the police in Palm Beach, Florida in 2005. There were also files from a subsequent investigation conducted by federal prosecutors in Florida that ended in 2008 with a plea deal, and from a final inquiry by prosecutors in Manhattan in 2019 that was never resolved after Mr. Epstein died in jail while the case was still proceeding in what the medical examiner ruled was a suicide. Many of the documents, which included phone records, travel logs, and what appeared to be case files with interviews featuring some of Epstein's female victims, were heavily redacted. The reaction from the right was muted. Mr. Trump's right-wing supporters have traditionally been among the most ardent advocates for releasing the Epstein files. They have long been convinced the documents would contain evidence of a cabal of prominent men, in their telling mostly Democrats, had joined Mr. Epstein in abusing young women and covering up their crimes. But those supporters were largely silent as the files came out, perhaps in response to the dearth of new incriminating information. Mr. Trump on Friday and throughout the weekend conspicuously refrained from commenting on the release of the materials, even though the case has haunted him politically. Whether those who have woven elaborate conspiracy theories around Mr. Epstein and the government's handling of the investigation will be satisfied by anything the Justice Department releases seems open to question. You know, there's something to that. The internet has had a long time, 6 years, to come up with its own story and its own narrative about what exactly has gone on here. The reality, as is so often the case, may be much more mundane than anyone thought it would be, thought it could be, or was interested in. And I think that's probably what makes this all so lackluster, is, you know, Twitter has come up with much more exciting narratives than necessarily they have maybe evidence for and all this type of thing. And here's the reality. A lot of the juiciest, best pieces of evidence may simply have never been collected. They just simply may not be in our possession. That's also a factor. It also says here Bill Clinton was featured prominently, whether by design or by chance. I think design. Many of the photographs included in the files are of Mr. Trump's most prominent political adversaries, former President Bill Clinton. One image depicted Mr. Clinton reclining in a hot tub with a person whose face had been blacked out. In many of the photos of Mr. Clinton, he was the only person whose identity could be discerned. The files provided little or no context for the pictures. The photos of Mr. Clinton were made public after Mr. Trump ordered the Justice Department last month to investigate any ties between the former president and of the Democrats to Mr. Epstein. Ms. Bondi immediately followed up on Mr. Trump's instructions by directing Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, to undertake the case. The White House on Friday sought to make political hay of the release of the photos of Mr. Clinton. "We did see something," Abigail Jackson, a White House spokeswoman, wrote in a social media post with the image of Mr. Clinton in the hot tub, "just not what you wanted." A spokesman for Mr. Clinton suggested the White House had engineered the release of the photos to distract from Mr. Trump's own relationship with Mr. Epstein. Quote, "The White House has been hiding these files for months, only to dump them late on a Friday to protect Bill Clinton," said the spokesman Angela Urena. "This is about shielding themselves from what comes next or what they'll try to hide forever." There were a few mentions of Trump. For months, Mr. Trump actively fought the release of the Epstein files, calling them a Democratic hoax and threatening to punish members of Congress who voted to allow them to be made public. But his name was rarely mentioned in the materials released on Friday. It remained unclear, though, whether he would figure more into the release of the files to come, and whether the Justice Department had selected the initial batch with politics in mind. Mr. Trump and Mr. Epstein were close friends for years, and the president's earlier reluctance to release the files prompted speculation about whether they prominently featured him. Most of the photos of Mr. Trump released on Friday had already been made public, including images of him and his wife Melania, with Mr. Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving a federal prison sentence for helping Mr. Epstein traffic underage girls. Written references to Mr. Trump came up in Mr. Epstein's address book and flight logs, as well as a message book in which Mr. Epstein's assistants let him know about missed phone calls. Versions of those documents were already public. Mr. Trump's name also comes up in interviews with Ms. Maxwell. Transcripts of the Justice Department had previously made public and re-released on Friday. And then, of course, all the famous people. The file showed how Mr. Epstein attracted a remarkably broad spectrum of famous people into his orbit, from rock stars Michael Jackson and Mick Jagger to legendary newsman Walter Cronkite. While the materials bore no suggestion that these celebrities had any knowledge or involvement in Mr. Epstein's illicit activities, they stood nonetheless as a remarkable testament to his ability to attract attention from the rich and famous. Still, the documents and photos were largely silent about a roster of other well-known people who have long been associated with Mr. Epstein and his finances, including businessmen like Leon Black and Leslie Wexner. I thought it was a good wrap up of what we found so far. The New York Times has they were there Friday night getting busy looking through things, and I thought it was very interesting how much there wasn't necessarily there, but also, and I think more importantly, the very clear narrative that's being created here. It will be interesting to see what else comes out. It'll be interesting to see how they justify the redactions, because by law they have to justify every single redaction and present to Congress why certain things are redacted. I've also seen in other reporting that of the amount, there's 500 pages that are completely redacted. And obviously photos and things like that are also redacted. The victims are a bit upset, as we saw in that video, that they're disappointed, frustrated, suspicious. Several of Jeffrey Epstein's victims said Friday that Justice Department had failed them with its partial release of files related to the federal investigations into Mr. Epstein's decades-long sexual abuse of teen girls and young women. They said the release of thousands of pages of photographs and heavily redacted documents did little to shed new light on the investigations in the scope of Mr. Epstein's crimes or conspirators. "They are proving everything they've been saying about corruption and delayed justice," said Jess Michaels, one of the earliest known victims of Mr. Epstein. "What are they protecting? The cover-up continues." Ms. Michaels has said she was sexually assaulted by Mr. Epstein in 1981 when she was 22 years old and training to be a dancer. She was among the victims who lobbied for the bipartisan law that directed the Justice Department to release virtually everything it had gathered during its sex trafficking investigations of Mr. Epstein and one of his main enablers, Ghislaine Maxwell. But more than 13,000 files released on Friday were heavily redacted and not easily searchable. If everything is redacted, where's the transparency?" said Marjit Chartouni, who said she was sexually abused by Mr. Epstein when she was 20 years old. Among the tens of thousands of pages was one document that did provide a long-sought window in the FBI's handling of Mr. Epstein's case. The file showed that Maria Farmer, another of Mr. Epstein's earliest victims, filed a federal child pornography complaint against him in 1996, but investigators did not begin to thoroughly scrutinize Mr. Epstein until about a decade later. Ms. Farmer, who fought for years to get the FBI to make public her complaint, said she felt vindicated to finally see the document, but also was heartbroken at the knowledge the FBI did not act on her complaint. "It is a tremendous relief that she doesn't have to continue to fight to prove her truth," said Miss Farmer's sister, Annie Farmer. She noted, though, she was disappointed by the general lack of transparency with Friday's release. "So many of the photos are irrelevant," said Marina Lacerda, who said Mr. Epstein sexually abused her when she was 14. "She was an important witness in the 2019 federal investigation that led to the filing of sex trafficking charges against Mr. Epstein, but she only recently went public with her story." We've been let down, Miss Lacerda said. We waited for this day to bring these other men who've been protected to justice. And yeah, there's that's we haven't really heard a lot about it because there's not a whole lot to hear. That's kind of the funny part about it all, is there's just not necessarily a whole lot to hear so far. As I told someone over the weekend, the justified redactions will be very interesting. It'll be interesting to see what's in there and why. So I will be patiently waiting for that. It will also be interesting to see how you know how this all develops. The fact that some photos have been taken down and one reposted and all this type of thing is not an endorsement um of the transparency of it all. So moving right along into other non-Epstein headlines, you may have heard a little birdie saying that President Trump signed an executive order rescheduling marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 controlled substance. And here's the video of him doing it right now.
That's a good one. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, it's from no medical use to Schedule 3. It's a big rethink of marijuana, a history that in this country extends back to its arrival with Mexican immigrants in the early 20th century, and its introduction, and then the war on drugs and putting people in jail for 20 years for using it, sort of thing. This is a big change. By the way, this does not decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. Let me make that clear. However, a couple governors in some states have said it's a lot easier to make the case for it to be legalized at the state level. I wrote in the newsletter, Kentucky and Pennsylvania particularly are looking at legalizing it and opening dispensaries and things like that. So there's all of that in here as well. But it being a Schedule 3 controlled substance does open up a lot of new research opportunities. It also opens up other federal funding options, different things like that, in order to continue to research it and find different uses for it. So it's definitely an opening. It's not insignificant. I did find this cool article from Marijuana Moment. And it says here, Trump's marijuana rescheduling move could boost state legalization efforts, lawmakers in Pennsylvania and Tennessee say. It says here, if marijuana rescheduling is finalized, as President Donald Trump instructed on Thursday, the practical policy impact on the federal level will be somewhat limited, as cannabis would remain illegal. But lawmakers in states like Pennsylvania and Tennessee say the political effect would ultimately prove more impactful as they work to enact local reforms in the next year. The executive order Trump signed directs the Attorney General to complete a process to move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 under the Controlled Substances Act, CSA, which would let cannabis business take federal tax deductions and lift certain research barriers. While it wouldn't legitimize state marijuana programs in the eyes of the federal government, the decision by a Republican president to loosen longstanding cannabis laws and recognize its medical benefits could embolden on-the-fence legislators at the state level, who may see it as a signal that the politics of the issue are shifting and there's a lower risk of federal enforcement action. In Pennsylvania, for example, bipartisan lawmakers who've been working to enact adult use legalization over recent sessions without success so far say Trump's rescheduling action could grease the wheels in the new year. Quote, I think having President Trump in particular sign this executive order really gives permission for a lot of Republican lawmakers who may have been reticent about actually admitting they supported it some cover to be able to actually support it, unquote. Representative Emily Kincaid, Democrat, said, I'm even more optimistic than I was that we're going to get legalization of recreational cannabis done in Pennsylvania in 2026. The executive action, quote, reflects the support that we see broadly in the nation, that overwhelmingly people support legalization of marijuana, and it's bipartisan, Kincaid told CBS Pittsburgh. There isn't much in which I agree with President Trump, but rescheduling cannabis is long overdue, she said separately in a press release. In 2026, Pennsylvania needs to join every other state in the northeastern United States and legalize adult recreational use for revenue, for jobs, for justice. Representative Abby Major, Republican, who's sponsoring a legislation bill with Kincaid, said she works forward to building off the momentum of rescheduling by working with my colleagues in the House and Senate to deliver what 74% of Pennsylvanians want, adult use cannabis. We've seen the clearest indication from the White House today that Republicans can lead on cannabis. It shouldn't be any different in Pennsylvania, she said on Thursday. Representative Dan Frankel, Democrat chair of the House Health Committee and another champion of reform in the legislature, also said rescheduling move will bolster the existing medical marijuana marketplace. I think it's going to be a significant step in the right direction to get us to a point where we're not criminalizing marijuana, he said. It's a significant step to creating an environment where people can purchase at this point medical marijuana without worrying about potential federal criminal penalties. While there may be some disagreement among lawmakers about rescheduling or broader reform, Trump's executive order marks a step towards common sense drug policy reform, said Dan Laughlin, Republican. Senator Dan Laughlin, Republican. Quote, I know this is a topic that sparks strong opinions on both sides, but if you take an objective look at the guidelines, marijuana should have never been classified as a Schedule 1 drug. I support the Trump administration's decision to reclassify it as a Schedule 3 substance, which better reflects the scientific evidence and could help unlock more research, medical applications, and regulatory clarity. And then it goes into some back and forth about Pennsylvania and Tennessee and all this sort of thing. So, or Kentucky rather. So, I wanted to note that and kind of show that video that marijuana rescheduling has finally occurred. As someone who was standing outside a grocery store asking for signatures for legalization in Colorado way back in 2012, it's been a long time coming. It's been 13 years, since all of that happened, and it's a really cool a really cool moment. So it's a powerful thing to kind of watch happen. And I think it is true. I mean, I think opinions have changed. The ideas about it have changed. People are in a different place with it than they used to be. And I think it's important to recognize that, at least somewhat legally. I think eventually full decriminalization will be very important. I will be very interested to see how this affects Rand Paul's attempt to change THCA products into the hemp market, because we've talked about that on the show. I wonder how much that will affect that. This may kill that. We'll see. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting and, exciting for some states and some people who may have been really reticent on it to finally go ahead and take the plunge, take the leap, and go from there. And it says evidence is an evidence-based step that acknowledges what doctors have known for years. Cannabis doesn't belong in the same legal category as heroin. But it says, but this is only the first step. Rescheduling cannabis doesn't undo the harms of the past. He said, real reform must include expungement, reinvesting resources in communities most impacted by the war on drugs, especially Black and brown communities, and a legal, regulated market that prioritizes public health, safety, and equity. And there are obviously some people who are still not necessarily on board. But we will see how things go in Pennsylvania and Tennessee, and we'll go from there. I want to dive into this story, and then we'll get into boomer told luxury communism. I was very inspired by this story because I sometimes get called a Cassandra, and sometimes I have predicted things happening years before they have happened. And so when this article came across from the New Republic, I was kind of like, interesting. The Americans saw this coming but were ignored and maligned. Call them the Cassandras, the people mostly not white and male who smelled the fascism all over Trump from Jump Street. Why were they alarmists, and how did anti-alarmism become cool? It says here, imagine I sent you back in time to July 2015 with the goal of saving liberal democracy in America. Donald Trump announced his candidacy a month ago. The polls were showing him with a narrow lead, and the media, while noting his extreme rhetoric, are mostly treating this as a fun diversion. You can't prove you're from the future. You're limited to broadly legal means. Can you persuade enough people to take it more seriously? After all, you know what's coming. January 6th, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, checks and balances failing, massive open corruption, troops on the streets, abductions by masked men, and concentration camps. But when you warn of these horrors, it sounds outlandish. People won't believe you. If you insist, you'll be dismissed as hysterical. Despite knowing the future, you won't be able to prevent it. This is not that far from the position many ordinary Americans found themselves in the heart of the Trump era. They weren't time travelers, but saw what was coming clearly enough. They called Trump's movement fascist from the very start, and often predicted specific milestones of our democratic decline well in advance. They were convinced that they were right, and often beside themselves with worry. Accordingly, they did everything they could to get others to listen. But not enough people did, and many attacked them, even as events proved them right again and again. As late as February 2025, respected legal commentator Noah Feldman was casually asserting our constitutional system was working fine, and Jon Stewart was scolding people who used the word fascist, claiming all they'd done over the last 10 years was cry wolf. There is an ancient archetype at work here. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy, of seeing the future, but cursed that she would never be believed. Her name is sometimes used as a pejorative for an overacting alarmist, which, appropriately enough, misses the point. Cassandra was, after all, right. When the Greek army seemingly abandoned the siege of Troy, leaving behind the Trojan horse, she pleaded with the Trojans not to bring it into the city. They did so anyway, and armed men burst out of it, dooming them all. Did we see the story again? Why did some immediately see America's dark future while others fought them so long and hard? As part of my research of this article, I interviewed 37 Americans who meet the profile of a latter-day Cassandra, a descriptor that I do not attach any negative connotation to. While there are some Cassandras among professional commentators, my focus here is on those in the Democratic base. I spent around half an hour with each, trying to get a sense of both their views and who they are as people. Many are quoted. Let's get down to some of the quotes, because that's interesting. I started by asking when they started feeling alarmed by Trump. Around the summer, maybe late spring 2015, Marcia, 54-year-old Korean-American woman who works in software in Texas, told me Yona, a pseudonym due to fears of violent retaliation, a white non-binary 38-year-old in Texas, echoed that from the beginning when he was in the Republican primary. Cassandra's clocked that this movement was truly dangerous early. When he announced he was running for president, when he came down the escalator, recalled another Texan, Kristen, a white 58-year-old college professor. What were they afraid of? Authoritarianism, political violence, racism, sexism, corruption, as well as threats to bodily autonomy and the LGBT rights were common themes. Everyone mentioned at least one of those, and the vast majority mentioned multiple. Quote, all the implications that I knew the election would have all come true, essentially, unquote. As Emily, a 38-year-old white female writer in Chicago, put it, Cassandras are defined by seeing in MAGA not just policies they disagreed with, but with a loaded gun pointed at the heart of our politics and culture. It just felt to me like we were the Weimar Republic, the lying press, the way he was weaponizing American people, the othering of people, Hispanics, they're rapists and all that, said Sonia, a 52-year-old white woman who works in marketing in Los Angeles. Why were they afraid of this? Or put better, how did they correctly see all this coming? Virtually all the Cassandras would make the same points. They used different examples and discussed them different ways, but the bones of the argument were the same. The experience for me, as interviewer, was like hearing the same song played by different musicians, once by a folk guitarist, then sung by an opera singer, then played by a heavy metal band, then a string quartet, and so on. Very different styles, but clearly working from the same sheet music. I started to think of this as the Cassandra song. It plays as follows. 1. Trump, or senior people in the movement, said, insert bad outcome or values. 2. We had good reasons to think they meant it. 3. We had good reasons to think his base wanted it. For any of the outcomes Cassandra's feared, they could cite rhetoric from Trump. For example, Ryan, a 43-year-old white professor in Texas, mentioned, quote, his refusal to accept an election, if lost, that's a moment where, okay, this is someone who's anti-democratic, unquote. This had been clearly stated in both the 2016 primary and, quote, in the debates with Hillary, unquote. The common understanding at the time was that all this was just political theater or rhetorical excesses, that Trump had no real convictions. But Cassandras didn't see it like that. Quote, I kind of think people have it reversed. Joe, a white 30-year-old from upstate New York, who now teaches at a university in the UK, said, lots of people don't detect that he's lying about what has transpired, but they think he's full of hot air about what he wants. But in reality, he's a total liar about what has happened, and he's deadly sincere about what he wants. Daniel, a 35-year-old black Army veteran who's now a student in Michigan, recalled how Trump had led Republican primary polling as early as 2011, based on his then recent embrace of birtherism, the claim that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. This was something that the Republican Party was open to racism as a fundamental part of the attitude and thinking of their leadership, Daniel said. But because the vehicle for that was such a ridiculous claim, to me that meant that the party was also open to ridiculous claims about other groups of people, about politics, essentially a non-reality-based politics. And that kind of politics is, of course, going to be authoritarian. All the Cassandras, in their own way, would lay out these elements, he says. He means it. The base will back it. They didn't condescend at all, but clearly felt they were reviewing fairly obvious facts about the world. And looking back, it was all obvious. The mythical Cassandra hardly needed divine gifts to sense the enemy army vanishing and leaving behind a giant horse statue was, to paraphrase ancient Greek sources, a bit sus. Her modern counterparts were not uncovering some carefully concealed secret, but simply using their eyes, their ears, their basic reasoning. So why did why did so many fight them so hard? Americans associate, often subconsciously, our two main political tribes with gender stereotypes. Conservatism is presented and understood as male, liberalism as female. Republicans are the daddy party, Democrats are the mommy party. This affects how we hear the claims made by either side and how seriously we take them. We tend to discount or dismiss female fear and pain. Because women are seen as less rational and more emotional, we are more likely to assume they're exaggerating or dismiss them as acting crazy. I talked with Professor Yolanda Wilson of St. Louis University, an expert in bioethics, and herself a Cassandra, who told me there's good documented literature that women's pain is not regarded with the same level of seriousness as men's. We can see this in healthcare outcomes, such as doctors dismissing female pain or underprescribing giving women over-the-counter painkillers or prescription drugs. As someone who is socialized female, you do get told a lot that you're overreacting, that you're being ridiculous, you can't take a joke, all those things, said Lars, a mixed-race, gender-fluid 35-year-old from New York. Once you have the label of a woman or a girl or female on you, people kind of discount what you say. That definitely was something I experienced in the time, even as recently as last autumn. Consider the difference with how we talk about male-coded institutions and ideas. January 6th was the enshrining of an election being lost, yet people traveled for miles to essentially throw a tantrum. And Republicans were not cast as hysterical, Yolanda observed. In fact, great media effort has gone into understanding the right's rage. That certainly doesn't happen with women. It doesn't happen to female-coded institutions. This is not to say no one in the media shared Cassandra's fears. During Trump's first run, opinion writers like Dana Milbank, Jamel Bowie, and TNR editor Michael Tomansky, writing in the New York Review of Books, called him a fascist or a neo-fascist. But the major newspapers and TV news providers seemed less convinced. They would pay lip service to concerns, but the focus and nature of their coverage showed they didn't take them that seriously. And this is the part where we mentioned the $1 billion of free media Trump got in 2016. And then there were those who were openly angry with the Cassandras. Trump couldn't become a dictator, Zachary Carabell told us in Politico before the 2016 election. We should think of all the checks and balances before we get too breathless about impending fascism and the end of America as we know it. Those who called Trump supporters racist should stop the hysterical moralizing, British journalist John Harris wrote. Even as we entered the Trump era proper, many could not shake the sense that the Cassandras were getting it wrong. Hysteria and sanctimony were proving to be a terrible strategy for dealing with Donald Trump, wrote William Watson in 2017. Simon Jenkins concurred in The Guardian, quote, with every sneer, liberals just make Trump stronger. The solution, according to Josh Barrow, was to just shut up. Liberals can win if they stop being so annoying. He's not wrong. Annoying, sneer, hysteria, hysterical, moralizing, breathless. I call commentators like this who are not pro-Trump but very against the Cassandra read of him anti-alarmists. They're encountering the Cassandra song as female, that annoys them, and they dismiss it on that basis. Let's see, I want to go down. Here we go. As always, the Cassandra's reasoning here is clear but not complex. Less pattern recognition and more recognizing there's a pattern. And then it goes on to say, likewise with race, non-white Americans prove more willing to connect the dots. Look, I'm a black woman from the South, Yolanda said. I've been black all my life. At this point, 50 years. There are ways of having life experiences and navigating the world that sometimes, certainly if one is self-reflective, give you an insight into behavior, and behavior to take seriously. Daniel also stressed the history of black people in America. You're constantly going over that history, constantly talking about it. As a result, you start to look for things that will lead, or could lead, to the suppression of others. Even if the others aren't black. If there's a list and people are being put on the list, black people are on the list. Might not be at the top of the list, but we are always on the list. It's true. It's very true. This is an important bit, how anti-alarmism became cool and masculine. We might note how different actual Cassandras are from the picture painted of them by anti-alarmists. A core tenet of whose worldview is that progressives generally, and Cassandras in particular, simply haven't understood Trump voters. As is so often the case in heated political debates, this is projection. Here's a list of everyone I've quoted making anti-alarmist arguments in this another article on them. Ezra Klein, Matt Iglesias, Brett Stevens, Corey Robin, Jon Stewart, David Brooks, William Watson, John Harris, Simon Jenkins, Zachary Carabell, Josh Barrow, and Noah Feldman. Not an exhaustive list, but enough for a quick sketch. All of them grew up in very blue areas, either California, New York, or Massachusetts, excepting Watson, who's Canadian, and Harrison Jenkins, who are British. All have spent the vast majority of their careers working in media or academia in either big blue cities or college towns. All are college grads, many have an elite education, Yale, Harvard, Oxford, and so on. Many are the children of significant academics. All are men. I'm sure you can find exceptions, but this does not seem to be the basic profile of a mainstream media anti-alarmist. To be clear, I don't think being an educated coastal elite makes you less of a real American. What's weird, however, is that they seem to think that. There's a desperate insecurity here, and I suspect it comes from our gendered politics. Because we think of men as more authentic, that quality of authenticity carries over to male-coded entities. There's this thing where Republicans are the real people, and we liberals are not real, as Megan, a 60-year-old white woman from Atlanta, put it. Men can be precious about gender identity. When challenged, they feel the need to prove their masculinity, often by lashing out at women. Media anti-alarmists are uncomfortable being feminized. They want to show that, yes, they're anti-Trump, but they're not one of those sanctimonious, hysterical, annoying, cringe liberals. The result is a preposterous dynamic in which non-elite Cassandras, who often live in red states and talk to MAGA zealots every day, are lectured on understanding them by columnists who may have never talked to one on their own turf in their entire lives. The columnist experience of the modern right is of their sanitizers, of pseudo-intellectual apologists having Ross Douthat on their podcast. They have not had the fear of their lives coming out as gay or trans in a deep, dark red community. They've not had the family staging intervention because they believe progressivism is literally demonic. British journalist John Harris, quoted above, felt confident to tell terrified liberals in the most condescending language they'd misunderstood MAGA after spending the best part of 5 days in the States. Cassandras make their arguments in simple, straightforward ways. They're earnest. They don't bury their politics in 12 layers of eye-rolling irony or pad it out with jargon or clever-sounding phrases. All this sincerity would become as negatively associated with femininity throughout the Trump era. There would be a trend towards considering earnestness cringe, to use Alex's words. She told me, quote, "I got a little sinking feeling when cringe became a common epithet. It's like, do we like the alternative?" And, yes. And then it gets into what Democrats need to do, can do about fighting and not being alone. This bit at the end is quite good. We all like to think of ourselves as someone who will tell hard truths or go against our group's consensus, but it's much rarer than people imagine because it's much harder than people imagine. Humans are hardwired to look to others for a model to follow. Just look at the anti-alarmist. Being a critical thinker with the courage to say unpopular things is at the heart of the justifactory myth that we tell ourselves. But these are virtues they have spectacularly failed to demonstrate over the last decade. It's easy to be angry about this, but at the end of the day, it's all too human, taking the path of least resistance at every turn, even if that road ultimately ends in disaster, especially if that's what everyone else in your tribe is doing. Going along, keeping your head down, is contagious. But so is courage. It's hard to say that other people don't want to hear to be looked at like you're crazy, or to speak up in an environment where free speech can no longer be simply assumed. But it becomes so much easier when you have others with you. I'm very fortunate that some family members kind of took a similar journey. We've had each other, and that's been exceedingly helpful, Ryan told me. We owe the Cassandras a great debt of being the first among us to raise their voices. It is largely because of them that we are not alone when we do, and there remains a critical mass of people at all levels of society resolutely opposed to our authoritarian drift, an army ready, eager even to fight. If liberalism's generals can only find it in themselves to actually lead it, it is because of them that there is hope. If you want to go read the whole thing, all the thing, because I skipped over some portions, it's on the New Republic, the Americans who saw all this coming but were ignored and maligned. So good, so true. I've felt the same way. I've met other people who felt the same way. I definitely got a lot of pushback from people after the last election when I was talking about how afraid and concerned I was about a second Trump term. I was concerned the first time, but doubly concerned the second time. And so I loved this article and I wanted to share it because I had so much identity with it. And I think it is true. If you are a person of color, especially if you're black, it's like, yeah, if things are gonna go weird, we're always on the agenda at some point. So like we're on kind of the lookout to be kind of like, oh, what's happening? What's happening? Are things still safe outside? What's happening? So like, we're on the lookout for fuckery. Like we're on the lookout for crazy things happening. And I think a lot of people are more insulated. And that was my experience talking to people after the election. When I said, like, yeah, I'm worried about my social media presence being watched. Guess what happened? I'm worried about, any sort of government crackdown on journalists or journalism. And everyone told me, no, 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 it'll be fine. You're freaking out, all this type of thing. And as time has gone on, I don't hear a lot of that anymore, needless to say. And I think a lot of people are very insulated from a lot of this stuff and don't understand what some of the country is like, what some communities are like, and what it's like to be in an out group. sort of thing. And when you're in the out group, you're very concerned with what's happening in the in group and how it's going to affect you, because that's been your experience your whole life. Is when you're in the out group, things happen to you that you don't control, that you don't like, that you don't want, but it's going to happen to you because the in group gets to do that. And it gives you a perspective. You're anticipating the in group doing something to you in a way that members of the in group don't see, because that sort of thing very rarely happens to them. And you kind of see this with the talk about George Floyd and BLM and the 1619 Project and all this type of thing. A lot of our conversation about race over the last decade has been out groups actively doing something to the in group, and there's been backlash because it sucks. Surprise, surprise. Just the surprise of no one in an out group. It sucks and it's not fun. And so, but I think that gives you a perspective to be kind of like, oh, I've seen this before. And just like the person said, in the Black community, we lived under Jim Crow for 100 years. And those stories persist. That history is talked about all the time. Anytime two or more Black people are gathered, we're talking. And so everyone knows the story. Everyone knows the things that have happened. Everyone knows how bad it can get. Every family has a story. Somebody's land got stolen. Somebody got lynched. Somebody got killed. Something, 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 something. Some of those are nationally known stories, like Emmett Till. Others happen quietly. But the reality is, within the Black community, there's an oral tradition of this stuff. And not that there aren't books, but there's a strong oral tradition going as well. And that, I think, makes everyone quite alert. And over in the Hispanic community, you want to talk about immigration crackdowns? That's something they've been dealing with off and on for decades. Obama, deporter in chief. I mean, so the people are on the lookout. They're aware of these things. People are dumb, but they're not always stupid. And so I thought this was very interesting to look at people who said, yeah, I saw it coming. I know what's happening. And I think the lack of, I think the people in the media who have quietly justified it, gone along with it, said everything's fine, your day-to-day life is fine, all this type of thing, have provided their own quiet cover and given a lot of the non-politically or news junkie engaged people a cover to say, oh, yeah, I guess everything's okay. Some of that sounds worrying, but it's not worrying yet, is it? And that's how fascism wins, incidentally. All right, let's talk about boomer luxury communism, then we're going to get out of here. So this was a great article from the Claremont Institute, The American Mind, about what is total boomer luxury communism. And I want to come back to some of the comments. But the article is here. Let's do some of the points. Americans are unaware of the harm this is inflicting on their wallets. And if we look at direct taxes and entitlements by age, you'll notice that as you get older, your tax burden decreases significantly and your wealth transfer increases dramatically over this time. And so and this is, I mean, obviously kind of an area of difficulty financially for the country. It says here, Americans are unaware of the harm this is inflicting on their wallets. 91% do not know that Social Security benefits can reach over $60,000 per person, and that a senior household can collect nearly $117,000 a year just from the program. Let alone the fact that Medicare programs cover golf balls, greens fees, social clubs, ski trips, and horseback riding. Total boomer luxury communism is tangling the country in a web of contradictions. If we don't radically overhaul America's entitlement regime, our entire nation will become a naturally occurring retirement community. And so I wanted to kind of wrap up on this. I don't know that we're going to read the whole thing because this is a lot, but let's just kind of get a flavor. The invisible driver of America's decline. For half a decade, the right has debated free market fundamentalism. This phenomenon is known as zombie Reaganism, libertarian neoconservatism, and neoliberalism. Whatever you call it, it never happened. That is to say, the reduction in government expenditure and size that Reaganites promised and liberals feared turned out to be a mirage. What happened instead is that starting in the 1980s, both parties set the country on a course toward total boomer luxury communism, or TBLC. TBLC is driving every aspect of American decline, from skyrocketing national debt and the erosion of our defense industrial base to the despair of young people. It's not the only reason for the decline, to be sure, but it's a major part of the problem. Yet TBLC has been entirely obscured from view. The essence of TBLC is that it redistributes wealth from younger families and workers to seniors, who are on average much richer. America has achieved the Marxist paradise of hunting in the morning, fishing in the afternoon, rearing cattle in the evening, and criticizing after dinner. Only it looks more like golf in the morning, horseback riding in the afternoon, drinks at the social club in the evening, and a restful night's sleep in a $1 million home. All thanks to the largesse of the US government. It has been common for some time to see AI memes about how much easier the boomers had it. Quote, my dad lived in a 4-bedroom house on a coal miner's salary, but I went to college and can't afford DoorDash, unquote. The old right usually responds to these sorts of claims with some facts about economic growth and median income. They wonder, sometimes out loud, why don't these young people appreciate what the conservative movement conserved? There's a kernel of truth in this. Just look at Canada if you want a glimpse of an America without a conservative movement. Too often, though, defenders of the conservative movement take it for granted that America preserved a free market system and a constitutional government through the Cold War era. Typically, our situation is compared with the centralized control of the CCP. If this comparison is accurate, however, it's hard to see it in the data. In his book Breakneck, Dan Wang observes, nearly 3/4 of China's population are spared from paying income tax. Low taxes make China stingy on welfare. Around 10% of its GDP goes towards social spending compared to 20% in the United States, and 30% among the more generous European states. China's pension and healthcare spending are much lower than that of other rich countries. In fact, Wang's comparison understates how much more the American government redistributes wealth compared to China. America is 3 times as wealthy per person as China, so the US spends at least 6 times as much per person on social programs as China, and most of that goes to seniors. There's 6 times as much wealth redistribution happening in America as in China. That's the communism, but only for boomers. The luxury part comes in how the government distributes these benefits. Perversely, retired millionaires have become the greatest recipients of government aid. Max Social Security benefits in the US are 3 to 4 times what seniors can ever hope to achieve in other developed nations such as Britain, Canada, and New Zealand. These are allocated by lifetime income, so the greatest Social Security benefits go to wealthy individuals who need them the least. An individual can take in over $60,000 a year from Social Security alone. Meanwhile, Medicare programs are paying for golf balls, greens fees, social club memberships, horseback riding lessons, and pet food. On average, retirees are much wealthier than younger generations. The metastatic growth of the American federal government took place largely in the absence of congressional deliberation or even public notice. For a brief period in 2013, centrist and center left commentators in the mainstream media admitted that the entire federal budget was biased against young people. In the Trump era, though, this fact has been memory hold, and progressives instead talk about increasing Social Security spending by tens of trillions. The facts on the ground about distribution and redistribution sit uneasily next to our popular perceptions of political polarization. Nearly 3/4 of U.S. federal spending goes on autopilot, without congressional review. Commentators often lament how divided Americans supposedly are, but is this true? What percentage of the federal budget do the two parties actually fight over? Only around 15%, it seems. The last year in which a majority of the federal budget went to so-called discretionary programs, which Congress actually reviews, was 1974. In other words, Democrats and Republicans agree on at least 85% of federal spending, mostly because they both support a massive wealth transfer from young workers to seniors. There's no political debate in Congress, even online, until recently, about total boomer luxury communism. Europe's economies are less robust, so they've already had to confront these truths. Germany's chancellor has declared that its welfare state, quote, can no longer be financed. France has been locked in an intense political fight over raising the retirement age, but in America, our politicians act as if we can finance an ever more generous retirement state despite our much higher military spending, an aging population, plummeting fertility rates, stagnant economic growth, and $38 trillion in national debt. When you put it like that. The last major Social Security reform occurred when President Ronald Reagan signed the Social Security Amendments in 1983. This legislation saved Social Security from an imminent insolvency by raising the retirement age, slowing benefit growth, and increasing taxes. Since then, American politicians have let Social Security grow on autopilot. New Zealand, Canada, Germany, and Sweden all reformed their versions of Social Security during this period. The US did not. As summarized by Avery James, Reagan's successors failed to control the massive elevation of government payments to the elderly, creating a powerful gentry constituency to move the country's parties and politics away from debating smaller or larger government. The GOP did betray Reagan's legacy, but that process began a lot earlier than 2016. Much of the stale intra-right wing debate referenced above conflates Reagan and his epigones. Today, most Americans have no idea how their tax dollars are spent. For example, 91% do not know that Social Security benefits can reach over $60K per person. They have no idea that a senior household can collect nearly $117,000 a year just from Social Security. And if you tell people that Medicare programs cover golf balls, greens fees, social clubs, ski trips, and horseback riding, they stare in disbelief. Zoomers and millennials may overlook America's massive social spending because they largely don't benefit from it. They just pay for it. As Chris Pope explains, the U.S.'s increasingly costly entitlements for middle-class retirees result in substantial redistribution away from young workers. This generational injustice is compounded at least 4 times over. The government taxes the young and transfers their wealth to seniors. Government borrows even more to transfer more wealth to seniors. Government debt causes inflation and slows economic growth, eating away at young people's incomes their entire lives. Government taxes young people again to pay for the debt incurred to pay for the senior entitlements. As Peter Thiel recently observed, boomers are strangely uncurious about how this is not really working for their kids. If all you can say is that Mamdani is a jihadist, communist, ridiculous young person, what that sounds like to me is that you still don't have any idea what to do about housing or student debt. If that's the best you can do, you're going to keep losing. To illustrate Thiel's point, with just one among many key examples, discussion of housing costs often completely ignores the cost of total boomer luxury communism, focusing exclusively on supply restrictions. Yes, it's true that when government regulations and zoning restrict the supply of housing and demand increases due to population influx, prices go up. But our nation's policies are heavily biased towards keeping seniors in homes that are more spacious and nearer to major employers than they would otherwise be. Take the housing market for young people in D.C. The median staff assistant in the U.S. House of Representatives earns $55,891 a year. Deputy press secretaries do a little bit better at $524,000. Meanwhile, the nation's capital is ranked as number 10 on the list of the U.S. Most expensive large cities, requiring over $78,000 a year just to afford basic necessities. It costs about twice that much to live a decent life. The average single-family home costs $749,000, and many of the D.C. homes selling for under $1 million are located in high-crime areas, not suited for young people wishing to start a family. Ward 3 of the district, by contrast, is gorgeous and relatively safe, as tree-lined streets and accommodating backyards give it a calm suburban feel, even though it's still close enough for a reasonable daily commute to the city's major employers. It has long been the official policy of the U.S. government, however, to help retirees stay in homes there as long as possible. For example, D.C. is home to NORCs, or Naturally Occurring Retirement Communities, also known as senior villages. We've turned prime real estate for young families into walkable nursing homes. In reality, NORCs are anything but naturally occurring. Total boomer luxury communism helps these seniors stay in spacious homes far longer than they otherwise would. Like almost everywhere else in the nation, DC offers special tax breaks for senior homeowners. This encourages them to stay in their homes despite their spare bedrooms, and instead of downsizing and selling to younger families. Nearly every state has special subsidies for senior homeowners, from exemptions to freezes to deferrals to help them stay in place. It gets worse. Medicaid long-term care exempts home equity of up to $1,097,000 from means testing, and the Federal Housing Authority provides Americans aged 62 or older a special home equity conversion mortgage, allowing them to turn home equity into cash without additional monthly payments. Often this transfers the burden to their heirs. If we don't radically overhaul America's entitlement regime, our entire nation will become a naturally occurring retirement community. Total boomer luxury communism is tangling the country in a web of contradictions. America now depends on a steady flow of new workers to pay for seniors' increasingly generous benefits, but it also pays people not to work and discourages family formation. The system is at war with itself. America's entitled system will change radically within a decade, if not sooner. The money is running out. The only question is who will bear the burden. Each day that passes means Gen Z and millennials pay more of the price for boomer irresponsibility. Aristotle reminds us that revolutions occur when there is an unjust distribution of the honors, offices, and privileges of citizenship. It is not time for revolution, but for reevaluation of how we as a nation distribute those burdens and privileges. We can only fix total boomer luxury communism once we recognize it for what it actually is. And I wish I had put this in the book America's Lost Generation, because this is just absolutely brilliant. Like 1010 no notes. And one of the books I read as part of it is called Theft of a Decade, and it gets into just the depressing financial future for people my age and younger, and how we just can't afford to be paying for people's gym memberships and golf fees and all this type of thing. Like, we just simply can't afford it. And that is total boomer luxury communism. And that really is the center of a lot of problems. And so this thing, the invisible driver of America's decline, yeah, the boomers got a lot. There has been a lack of reform on Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid. And I mean, this graph here is just stunning when you look at it this way. This is per person in 2021 dollars, starting at 0, 5,000, 10,000, and age cohorts. So you're paying the most taxes at 45 to 54. You're starting to get a little bit of wealth transfer, but the minute you hit 65, which is right about there, your tax burden decreases dramatically and the amount of money you get increases a lot. This cannot happen forever. We're going to have to reform these programs. And that means old people of the future, that's me at this point, Gen X first, but millennials after that, are going to be getting less. These programs are going to have to be brought to heel. People are going to have to be more responsible for themselves and do more means testing and slow stuff and slow down some of these payments and not shovel more money into the pockets of the wealthy. So this is On the American Mind with Claremont Institute. If you want to check that out, um, yeah, that's all for this week. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. Thank you so much for coming with me on this journey. Thank you to everyone who's watching. Um, it's been a great 2025. The show's grown so much this year. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a fan. Please check me out on social media at Cameron Cowan on Instagram, TikTok. I'm sorry, Instagram, uh, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and at Cameron Journal on TikTok. I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, head over to CameronJournal.com/newsletter or CameronJournal.substack.com. Either one is great. And I will see you all on New Year's Eve for the Living Joke New Year's Eve stream and hangout. And I will see you back at the News Hour on January 5th, I think, is the first day. That's the first Monday, I think, and we'll try to pull together a news hour then. But I will see you in January. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night. Have a wonderful rest of the new year. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. I'll see you in 2026. Bye-bye.